right, so today we are going to be wrapping up biomes by discussing aquatic biomes. So the previous few days we have done terrestrial biomes, which are on land, and now we are going to take a look at biomes that exist in water, whether that's salt water or freshwater or somewhere kind of in between. Okay, so just a little bit of facts here. Saltwater covers 71% of Earth's surface, whether those are oceans or saltwater seas. Freshwater only covers about 2%, so that includes large lakes, rivers, streams, etc. Wetlands too. There are 5 oceans. They contain 98% of Earth's water. So, a very large proportion of Earth's water is salt water. Okay. So think about what are the 5 oceans. I know when I was back in grade school, there was only 4, but that has changed. So there's Arctic, Pacific, Atlantic, Indian, and Southern now. Okay. So pretty much surrounding Antarctica. So just like on land, there are some factors that will determine the biodiversity that occurs in water. So that includes temperature. Temperature is very important. So typically, just like on land, the warmer the temperatures, the more likely the ecosystem will be pretty biodiverse. Okay, salinity, of course, will determine the plants and animals that can survive there, that are adapted to survive there. The amount of dissolved oxygen is very important for animals as well as bacteria to be able to perform cellular respiration. The availability of food is very important. So if there isn't a whole lot of plant life, then there cannot really be much of a food web there. All right, so the availability of food is very important. The more food there is, the more biodiverse the ecosystem can be. Okay, and of course the access to light. So yes, there are examples of areas that have no light where there is life. They're able to perform a process known as chemosynthesis using sulfur compounds to provide energy for them. But the more biodiverse ecosystems are going to have a lot of sunlight and a lot of nutrients for plants to be able to grow. Okay. So in any aquatic ecosystem, there is, of course, going to be a photic zone, which is where sunlight is available. And on some of them, if they are deep enough, there will be an aphotic zone where there is no sunlight available. So some of the organisms, just kind of classifications here. I'm sure you've heard plankton before, of course, if you've ever seen SpongeBob. But plankton, that is just a name for animals that drift, or even plants too. Okay, so phytoplankton, ultraplankton, those are 2 different types of plankton that perform photosynthesis. So those are our producers. But there are also zooplankton, which will be our consumers. So things like jellyfish. Okay, you may not think of jellyfish as plankton, but they just really drift along in the water by the currents or the waves. So they are considered to be plankton. Nekton, those are animals that are really able to swim well. So animals like fish, sharks, turtles. Benthos are bottom dwellers. They're going to be the ones walking around down near the bottom of the ecosystem. So they could be, starfish, oysters, crabs. Okay, they have the ability. They're just there at the bottom of the ocean or the lake. Okay, and then decomposers, which can be a few different organisms, but we're mainly talking about bacteria here that take dead or decaying organisms and decompose them, put their chemicals back into the ecosystem. Okay, so just kind of dividing up the marine ecosystem. So out in the ocean, there will be what is called the coastal zone. So near the coast, near land, it will be much shallower than as you get farther away from land, because it's still up there on the continental shelf. So those waters are going to be sunny, they're going to be warm, they're going to be shallow, there's going to be lots of nutrients there most of the time. And most importantly, they're fully lit, okay? So lots of sunlight going all the way down to the bottom. So coastal ecosystems can include estuaries, which are where freshwater ecosystems like a wetland or a river will meet the ocean. Salt marshes, mangrove forests. So those are, again, marine wetlands. Okay. Coral reefs and kelp forests will be a little bit farther out than the mangrove forests and the salt marshes would be. Okay, but all of these are considered to be marine ecosystems because the water is at least somewhat salty. Okay, so in all of these, there is a very large amount of biodiversity in all of these ecosystems: salt marshes, mangrove forests, estuaries. You know, I'm sure you figured coral reefs all the time that you've ever seen one. There seems to be so many fish, so many animals there. But of course, the coral is also is many different organisms. Okay, so together, these coastal zones only make up a small fraction of the ocean area around the world, only 10%, but they actually are home to 90% of all marine species. So a small area, but hugely, hugely biodiverse. All right, so a little bit more detail about some of these. So estuaries, again, are where rivers meet the sea. So it's a mix of freshwater and seawater. So animals and plants that live here are pretty used to fluctuations in salinity, okay? Because you have fresh water and you have pretty salty water coming together. So depending on the tide, depending on rainfall on land, the water in an estuary can fluctuate in its salinity pretty substantially. Okay, so coastal wetlands, which include down here, this is a salt marsh, and up here, this is a mangrove forest. So the mangrove trees, they have these crazy root systems, okay, that really help to stabilize the ecosystem. But, you know, it's a great place for fish and other animals to raise their young because it's harder for predators to get at them within here. Okay, so this is the mangrove forest, this is a salt marsh. Again, both of these are considered to be marine wetlands, okay, because, freshwater marshes are similar, they just have fresh water. Okay. And all of these ecosystems have a very high amount of productivity. And all that means is that there is a large amount of photosynthesis happening there. Okay. So lots of sunlight and a lot of nutrients allow for that photosynthesis to, for all these plants to perform photosynthesis at a pretty high level. All right, so continuing on with the coastal zones of marine ecosystems, they provide many, many ecosystem services, so things that they do for the ecosystem. They help to filter out pollutants, okay, so the plants and some of the animals here will help to filter pollutants that may be coming from humans, okay, to kind of purify the water a little bit. They provide food and habitat. for a lot of species. And like I was just saying with those coastal wetlands, they provide a nursery site, so a safe place to raise young for a lot of different species. So, especially with the kelp forests and, the mangrove forests, they help to reduce damage caused by, large storms like hurricanes or just large thunderstorms. They help to reduce the amount of damage coming from those storms on the coast. Okay, so it prevents erosion, and a lot of that energy is absorbed from the storm in these ecosystems. Okay, and there can also be what are called barrier beaches or barrier islands, which are kind of like sandbanks that provide a little buffer between the main part of the ocean and the coast of the land. All right, so now we are getting farther out into the ocean, away from the coastal area, in what is called the pelagic zone. Okay, so this is the open ocean, and there are layers here. So we have the euphotic zone, and then the bathyal zone, and then the abyssal zone. So we're going from lots of light to just a bit of light to very little to no light down here. Okay, so the photic means light. So this is lots of light up here. Bathyal only has a little bit, and then the abyssal has none. Okay, so even up here in the euphotic zone, there is no place for plants to really take hold. So the only productivity that is going to occur up here is through different types of plankton, like algae. Right? So there's, for the amount of area, there is very low productivity per unit area. However, since this is so vast, since the ocean is so vast, that still comes out to be a lot of productivity that happens in the ocean, in the open ocean. Okay, so it's the highest amount of productivity. It's just that per unit area is pretty low. Okay, it's just that there's so much area that leads to a very large amount of productivity total. Okay, so the ocean bottom, so right at the bottom of the abyssal zone, or even at the bottom of the continental shelf too, the ocean bottom, if we're in the open ocean, is going to be dark, it's going to be cold, and there's going to be lots of nutrient content because of what is called marine snow, which is just dead organisms kind of floating down. They're being broken down, but they don't get completely broken down until they get to the bottom. So as a result of all the decomposition that occurs, there's pretty low oxygen, a lot of deposit and filter feeders. So animals that are going to be feeding on the stuff that's coming down, the snow that's coming down from above. So a lot of decomposers there. All right, so as we said before, there are lots of benefits of marine ecosystems. So photosynthesis that happens in the coastal areas as well as in the open ocean provides a lot of oxygen for Earth. And not only that, but also for within the water in the ocean. Okay, water purification, filtering out pollutants, climate moderation, being able to take in carbon dioxide, which we'll talk about later. As is kind of described here. So taking in carbon dioxide, absorbing light and heat too, nutrient cycling, reducing storm damage, those coastal ecosystems do, and a high amount of biodiversity. Okay, so those are all ecosystem services. Economic services are services that are done for humans specifically, so things like providing food, providing energy that we can harvest, pharmaceuticals from plants or animals that have certain chemicals that we can use, okay, and the list goes on. So humans have many impacts on marine ecosystems. including climate change, which is leading to ocean acidification. So the warmer, higher pHs lower pHs are really hindering, especially the reefs. Okay, there's coastal development that happens that is destroying coastal habitats, which are very important all around the world. Overfishing, which is destroying food webs, destroying ocean bottom habitats, pollution being dumped into the ocean, pollution from ships too getting dumped into the ocean, as well as invasive species coming from one area to another that can cause a huge problem on native species and native food webs. So that now brings us to freshwater ecosystems. Okay, so freshwater, we're talking about surface water. So this is all water that does not infiltrate into the ground, whether that's in streams or in possibly lakes. This surface water that does not infiltrate will become runoff. So it flows into a body of water. So it starts off with small streams, leads to rivers, and those streams or rivers can flow into the ocean or into inland lakes. So streams have what are called a watershed, and that is just all of the land that will deliver runoff into a body of water, whether that's a stream or a lake. All right, so lakes are large bodies of standing freshwater. Again, just like the ocean, there are zones. So the littoral zone is the shallow, it's like the coastal zone for the ocean, okay, but it's near the shore, shallow, very sunlit. The limnetic zone is the open area, so going away from the land in our lake. So the limnetic, though, is going to be the upper layer, and then we get to the profundal zone, which is deeper, where there's either little or no sunlight, where little photosynthesis can happen. And then benthic is just the bottom of the lake. Okay, so here we go. So over here towards the shore, that's the littoral zone. And as we come out, we get into the deeper water. So the limnetic is at the top where there's lots of sunlight and lots of photosynthesis that can happen. Profundal zone is below that where there is little to no light. And then the benthic zone is at the very bottom of the lake. So again, just like with the ocean, we're going to have lots of biodiversity up here, lots of photosynthesis happening. And as we get down, little photosynthesis. So these are going to be, the larger animals, predators that would be coming up to eat the primary consumers that are eating the plants up here. Okay, and then down here we would have our decomposers. So a few different types of lakes. There are oligotrophic, which there's not a whole lot of nutrients, pretty deep, steep banks, so not a whole lot of opportunity for plants to really take hold. So there's going to be low amount of productivity in these lakes and very clear water. Eutrophic is going to be the opposite. So there is a wealth of plants and algae. So it's going to look green, but there's high productivity because there's lots of nutrients. And this can be enhanced by humans too. Okay, and then mesotrophic is just kind of, I guess, somewhere in between. It's like a normal lake. So not super clear, not super murky, somewhere in between. Not super productive, but also not productive. All right. And like I said, humans can alter lakes by adding fertilizers, not on purpose, but on accident, okay, just due to runoff. And that can lead to what is called cultural eutrophication, which is just where there is a lot more productivity because of the input of these fertilizers. All right, so here we've got our oligotrophic lake. Here we have, these mats of algae. Looks gross, okay, but lots of productivity here due to an excess of nutrients. Next, we got streams. So these are going to be the moving water ecosystems. So streams and rivers drain a very large amount of Earth's land surface, taking that water to lakes or oceans. So in any stream, or really any river, we should say, there's what is called a source zone. So where the water is coming from, whether it's a spring coming from underground or maybe from snowmelt. So it's shallow, it's cold, running pretty fast because it's probably coming from higher elevation. And there's a lot of dissolved oxygen, but because it's so cold and because the water is running so fast, there's not a whole lot of productivity just because plants are going to struggle to take hold in these waters. Okay, but as you get farther down the stream, there will be more and more nutrients that get into the water. It will eventually kind of level off. The water will get warmer and deeper, so there will be more plant friendly water, so more nutrients, and of course the warmer, more sunlit water will allow for the plants to grow. And then eventually you get down to the floodplain zone, which is where the water is really, really flowing pretty slowly. And again, more productivity. The water is more silty because of all of the sediment that's being picked up here. Okay, so that silt will get deposited down near the delta. Okay, so if we're talking about around here, source zones would be the small streams that you see, like little creeks. And then the transition zone, we would be kind of talking about the larger streams and even talking about like the Allegheny or the Monongahela would be kind of those transition zones too. Okay, so there you go. Nice little diagram here. So we got the source zone up here in the mountains, the rainfall, the snowfall, snow melts, and then that leads to the formation of the stream. More tributaries come in, add water to our main stream, and then eventually it flattens out into the floodplain. And one of the last things that we're talking about today are inland wetlands. And inland wetlands are freshwater wetlands. So similar to the mangrove forests or the salt marshes, but we have freshwater in these. So we can be talking about marshes or swamps. Swamps have trees, marshes do not. It's mainly grasses. Bogs and fens. Bogs are acidic and the water is much thicker. Fens are similar to bogs, but they are actually connected to a groundwater, so the water has a little bit more movement. And then prairie potholes are just, in really flat areas where glaciers kind of dug out a little bit of a ditch, and water will sit in that for part of the year from rainfall. So all of these different types of wetlands provide ecosystem services. So wetlands are very, very good and very beneficial, not just for the ecosystems that surround it, but also for humans too. So being able to filter out toxic waste and pollutants, super important, helping to reduce erosion and flooding by absorbing water that is running off. Okay, so by removing these, that would cause more flooding because there's nothing to absorb that excess water. So in taking in that water, they'll hold it and be able to really let the water infiltrate and go down into the ground to replenish groundwater. So a lot of biodiversity in these ecosystems, so providing a habitat for species, providing many products as well. And so it could be plants or animals for food, and then also recreation for humans as well. So here we go. We got a swamp, we got a marsh, some prairie potholes, and a nice little bog here. Okay, so humans really impact freshwater ecosystems. Dams and canals are one of the big ones, so that prevents the flow, which means that the silt, which is very important for down near the delta, and providing structure down at the delta will hold the silt up here. So eventually, back behind this dam, it's going to fill up with that silt, and there's not going to be any room for the water. But that also prevents a lot of the flow of the water downstream too, which can cause some problems. Okay. So having this dam here will separate the habitat and possibly destroy it. Humans can alter wetlands by removing them. That's going to prevent their ability to reduce floods. Water pollution can damage ecosystems too by putting toxic stuff into the water. But not only that, but also the fertilizers, which can lead to eutrophication. And then, again, the wetlands being drained for human purposes. Okay, so that is all that we are doing for today. So what I actually want you to do tonight for homework is write me a paragraph. You can write it in your notebook and then upload it, or you can type it and upload it. But I want you to tell me what your favorite biome is, whether it's aquatic or terrestrial, and give me 5 reasons why. Okay, so I want it to be written formally. You can do it in your notebook, you can type it, but I want to know which is your favorite biome, and you got to give me 5 reasons why. Okay, and that is all for today.